Our story begins in 1964. Lata Mangeshkar is 34 years old and is already the most successful playback singer of the country. She's at the Brabant Stadium in south of Mumbai performing at a charity concert. Suddenly the organizers tell her that there's an uninvited guest at the concert. None other than the then Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. She's surprised because Nehru wasn't keeping well. It was all over the news. He was really sick. Why has Nehru gone out of his way to attend a musical function that he wasn't even invited to? Lata Mangeshkar thinks. And then it strikes her. She knows exactly why. And she knows exactly what she needs to do. At the last moment, she adds one special song to the list of her songs for the evening. The song is "Ae Mere Watan Ke Logo, Zara Aankhon Mein Bhar Lo Pani." The same song that she had sung a year back in 1963 at the Republic Day function that had famously moved Nehru to tears. She sings that song for Pandit Nehru from the stage, looking into his eyes as though performing for him. The performance is magical. Everyone applauds. Some in the audience weep. And as soon as she finishes the song, Nehru leaves. But before he leaves, he calls Lata Mangeshkar to his car. Latadi had a great deal of respect for Nehru, so she goes to see him. When Nehru sees her, he holds both her hands in his hands, touches them to his forehead, and says to Latadi in his deteriorating, feeble, but still very emotional voice, he says, "Beta, I had come here today only to hear you sing that song. I'm so happy that you sang it for me. Thank you." Lata Mangeshkar was right. He had come precisely for that song, even when he was sick, even when he wasn't invited to it. We still don't know why Nehru did something so bizarre when he was so sick. In just a few months, he passed away. The Indochina War of 1962 had had a profound psychological impact on Nehru. He was mocked and ridiculed for his naivety. India was one of the first countries to recognize the legitimacy of the People's Republic of China in 1949. This was right after our independence, and India was still sort of drunk on the Gandhian doctrine of do good and others shall do good as well. But in 1962, China stabbed India in the back by invading Aksai Chin. India and Nehru realized that statecraft is very different from the freedom movement. Nehru realized that he had been wrong, that Mao's China was not like the ancient Chinese civilization that he thought he understood. And it was an expensive mistake. Not only did we lose Aksai Chin to China, which to this day is with them, but thousands of Indian soldiers died. Nehru did not take it lightly. After India lost the war, Nehru declined, personally and politically. It is an open secret that India's loss to China had dealt a deep emotional blow to Nehru. In 1963, Lata Mangeshkar sang that very song right after the war at a Republic Day function. And Nehru wept listening to that song. We can only guess what he was thinking, but I guess the song gave him a temporary reprieve from his own pain, his own guilt, and perhaps some semblance of catharsis. Because what else can explain him wanting to listen to that song again, even when he was sick, even when he wasn't invited to that concert? And I'm sure all of us have had such an experience. A song, a film, a piece of writing sometimes somehow just takes us into another plane of consciousness. For a brief fleeting moment, we forget our miseries. We feel whole and complete as though everything is going to be okay. And how thankful we become to the artist who made that moment possible. We may never meet them, but in that brief moment, we see them and they see us. How odd and bizarre that such a thing exists in the world. It raises all sorts of questions like, what is the purpose of art and what is the purpose of an artist in this world? This episode tries to answer those questions through the life of one of the greatest artists to have ever lived in India. She not only profoundly impacted India's culture, but also pretty much created and molded an entirely new art form. This is All Risk is Creative. I'm your host Palash Kulkarni, and you are listening to Lata Mangeshkar Creates a New Art. In 2009, on the occasion of her 80th birthday, Lata Mangeshkar was interviewed by Javed Akhtar. In the interview, Javed Saab asked Lata Di very casually that if she were to be reborn in her next birth, what would she want to be reborn as? Now, this was a very casual question. Javed Akhtar wasn't expecting a profound answer. But Lata Mangeshkar, unexpectedly, had a deeply profound answer ready. She said that she doesn't want a rebirth at all. Agar na hi kare to achha hai, she said with her trademark half smile. Javed Akhtar was left a little speechless. He didn't know what to say. Why would the great Lata Mangeshkar not want to be born again? Now, when I saw this, and I actually saw this very early in my research, my cousin showed me this interview when I told her that I was doing an episode on Lata Di, I felt very sad. But as I read more about Lata Mangeshkar's life, I realized that her wish to not be reborn is not sad, but actually deeply spiritual, actually fundamental to how she saw her life, her art, and her purpose on earth. And as I researched more about her life, it became clear to me why she said that. She was asked a similar question by Yatindra Mishra in his fantastic book, Lata, A Life in Music. This book has been my primary source for this episode, the version that's translated by Ira Pandey. Unfortunately and shockingly, there is very little material available on Lata Di's life. And in this episode, we will get into why that is the case. Why do we know so little about Lata Di's life when she has basically been ubiquitous in our lives for the last 75 years? Anyway, Yatindra Mishra asks her, do you ask for moksha as you sing? Lata Mangeshkar replies, moksha is a beautiful concept. I pray that I am never reborn. I feel my music alone will ultimately release me from this unending cycle of birth and death. The reason I'm starting our story here is because this idea is central to understanding Lata Mangeshkar's life. It sounds very lofty and almost farcical to say something like that, but I want to say upfront that Lata Di is not a human being like you and I. For her, her music was inseparable from her existence. She saw her art as a way to reach the ultimate purpose of human life, which according to her was moksha, a state of such high consciousness where there is no desire, no pain, and no suffering. She's happy in wanting moksha, in fact, as happy as a human being can be. Music was not only her profession, it was life itself. The last film song that she recorded was in 2006, Luka Chipi, for A.R. Rahman for the film Rang De Basanti. But she continued her riyaz up until her death in 2022, even at 90 years of age. Every day she got up before dawn and trained herself. It didn't matter she wasn't singing for an audience. It didn't matter she wasn't getting paid. She did it because music, because riyaz was the only way she knew how to live. This is the defining idea of Lata Di's life. Reminds me of that documentary, Jiro Dreams of Sushi. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's a brilliant documentary. I highly recommend it. It's about Jiro Ono, this 90-year-old sushi chef who has done nothing but perfected the art of making sushi all his life, like his life depended on it. He has had the same routine for 70 years of his life because that's the only way he knows how to live. And he is breathtakingly happy, the happiest man you'll ever come across. He loves his art so much that he even dreams of sushi when he sleeps. That's how art Lata Di was. Art as the only way to live. Practice of art as the very purpose of existence, as a way to reach moksha. Now, this is not a new concept. In fact, this concept is at least 2500 years old, and in fact was proposed in the very first book, very first manual written on arts and practice of arts anywhere in the world. And it was written right here in this very land in ancient India. This book forms the very basis of all Indian arts, from Indian theatre to Indian music to Indian dances like Bharatnatyam, Kathak, Odissi, you name it. And by extension, even our modern Indian films. This book has been so fundamental to Indian culture that it is sometimes referred to as the fifth Ved, alongside Rigved, Samved, Atharvaved and Yajurved. Not only that, to understand the history of playback singing, and by extension to understand the spiritual impulses of Lata Di, we have to start with this book. The name of the book is Natya Shastra. Natya Shastra is the first detailed encyclopedic thesis on the arts anywhere in the history of the world. It is said to be written by the sage Bharat Muni himself. The exact time period is a subject of debate, but one can assume it was between 500 BCE to 200 BCE. Some accounts suggest that it could be from much before. It's a huge book, a total of 36 chapters with 6,000 verses, and it covers almost every facet of performing arts: origins of drama, theatre architecture, stage setup, types of plays, ras, the emotional flavor of the art piece, or what we today call the creative aesthetic, bhav, which is emotions, abhinay, which is expression, acting styles, costumes, makeup, music, everything. One interesting aspect about Natya Shastra is that it delineates or it blurs the boundaries between theatre, music and dance. It sees all three of them as part of a single whole. Now, I'm not saying that the book came first and then came all the art forms. Of course, it was the other way around. The art forms evolved naturally, and then someone, in this case Bharat Muni, studied it and theorized about it and wrote it down. But once it was written down, things became official. And Natya Shastra is that official document, which basically means that even for centuries before Natya Shastra was written and compiled, Indian art forms have always had theatre, dance and music all fused together. That's why even today, dance forms like Bharatnatyam, Odissi, Kathakali, etc. are sort of like theatre. They tell a story and the dancers perform through their body and facial expressions. That's also why Indian theatre usually has music and dance as an inseparable part of the drama itself. And that's exactly why Indian films 2500 years later continue to have that tradition of song and dance, because Indian cinema began as an extension of Indian theatre. Now, we the urban educated Americanized Indians may snigger at the sentimentality of the song and dance routine because we are so exposed to the European and American way of cinema, and we believe that that is the absolute zenith of cinema, as it were. But that's not necessarily correct. The songs and dance is what makes our films unique. It is a part of us. It has been a part of us for thousands of years. That's why playback singing, the art of this episode, is a uniquely Indian art form. The term playback singer doesn't exist anywhere else. And thank God Indian films have song and dance, because imagine how poor our culture would be without Indian film music. Imagine our culture without Lata Mangeshkar, without A.R. Rahman, without Ilayya Raja, without Mohammad Rafi, without Kishore Kumar, and even without Arijit Singh. Imagine our weddings, imagine our festivals, imagine our daily lives without Indian film music. Our culture is musically rich because our films have music. And the reason our films have music is because that's just how storytelling has been in this land for thousands of years. That's just who we are as people. We love music and dance in our stories, how much ever you tell yourself otherwise. But apart from being a manual about how art should be done, Natya Shastra also talks about the philosophical aspect of art and artist. As per Natya Shastra, the artist should treat her art like a devotee treats her god. True practice of the art in and of itself is a way to moksha, the highest purpose of human life. It lays down the path of an artist very simply. Practice your art as though it is everything, as though it is life itself, whatever that art may be, and you shall find your life's true purpose. And if I were to extend that concept into modern times, art can be strictly artistic, like music, dance, theatre, writing, etc. But also that art can be what you love and derive joy out of. Like you run a startup, or you are a researcher or a programmer, you make sushi like Jiro Ono, or run a shop or take care of a garden. Whatever you consider as art and take great pleasure in doing, if you just do that like it's your life itself, that is enough to live a complete life. Of course, it's way easier said than done. Most of us don't even know what our art is, let alone pursue it, and let alone pursue it with such dedication. And even the ones who do, they treat it more like a profession than life itself. I'm not sure how many of us will continue pursuing what we do if we are not paid for it. Now, one of the art forms that came from Natya Shastra is the Indian classical music. Until about 1,000 years back, Indian classical music was very rigid with strict rules and codes about how music should be. Then around the 11th century, as Muslim rulers started ruling over parts of North India, they brought with them Persian influence to Indian classical music. And around that time, and especially during the Mughal period, Indian classical music branched into two different art forms. Hindustani classical music of the north, which absorbed the Persian influence and welcomed spontaneity and improvisation, which was erstwhile not allowed. It developed its own gharanas because of its diversity and improvisational character. And the other branch, the other art form, became what we today know as Carnatic music, which remained localized to the south of India and retained the rigidity and the strictness of the old classical music. Lata Mangeshkar comes from the tradition of Hindustani classical music, and it is Hindustani classical music that eventually made its way to our films. And our film music today, although very divorced from the real rigorous classical music, owes its root to Hindustani classical music. An interesting aside, and I promise we are going to start discussing Latadi's life in just a minute. In the research for this episode, the more I learned about Hindustani classical music, the more I realized that if you want to understand India as a whole, what does it mean to be an Indian, and all those very hard questions about diversity and history and our differences, how do we reconcile all of them? Actually understanding Hindustani classical music is a very good start. I think it is a perfect metaphor for India itself in all its contradictions and its diversity. Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Saab, one of the virtuosos of this art form, who incidentally was also one of Lata Mangeshkar's gurus, by the way. In fact, once Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Saab invited Lata Mangeshkar to share the stage with him, and she refused, saying that it would be sacrilegious for her to share a stage with such a great artist. And this was after Lata Mangeshkar was the biggest singer in the country already. Anyway, Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan Saab was once asked about partition of India, and he said, and I quote, "If one child from every family in India had been taught about Hindustani classical music, India would never have been partitioned." End quote. In Hindustani classical music, the Muslim virtuosos are called ustads, the Hindu virtuosos are called pandits. But that's where the differences end. All of them, whether they look up to Allah or to Ram, music is the ultimate divine form. Submission and practice of music is the ultimate purpose of life as a way to reach moksha, as was written in Natya Shastra. I highly recommend you watch interviews of people like Pandit Hari Prasad Chaurasia, Pandit Shiv Kumar Sharma, Ustad Zakir Hussain, Ustad Bismillah Khan, and Pandit Ravi Shankar, just to get a sense of how they see the Indian civilization and how reconciliatory their vision of Indian history is. It will be a welcome change from the toxic left-right divide of modern politics that we see every day. I actually thought about going deep into this, but I'd rather have you guys read it in your own time. But believe me, it will be time well spent. Which brings us, finally, after a not-so-quick detour of Indian history of arts, to the subject of this episode and the most popular modern practitioner of Hindustani classical music, none other than Bharat Ratna Lata Mangeshkar. Lata Mangeshkar was born on 29 September 1929. She was the eldest child of the theatre artist and Hindustani classical vocalist Deenanath Mangeshkar. She was born in Indore, where I come from. In fact, I'm happy to report that I'm recording this from Indore right now, not more than a mile away from where she was born. Deenanath Mangeshkar was a disciple of the Gwalior Gharana, one of the most prestigious gharanas of Hindustani classical music. The gharana developed during Akbar's reign, and Tansen, the great Tansen, is said to have been from the Gwalior Gharana as well. Deenanath Mangeshkar was a celebrity. His theatre company would travel from city to perform plays. He was extremely talented and apparently very handsome. He could charm the audience just like that, they said. Such was Deenanath Mangeshkar's talent that Bal Gandharva, another stalwart of Indian theatre, said about Deenanath Mangeshkar that if he were to join his theatre company, he would welcome Deenanath by throwing a carpet of rupee coins under his feet. Now, as it would turn out, Deenanath would become the most important person in Latadi's life. You could say that she was made in his image. Like all fathers of those days, he was a very strict father. One day when Lata was 5 years old, one of Deenanath's students came to their house to practice music. And when baby Lata heard him sing a song, she started correcting him, saying that this is not how my father sings that song. You should sing it like this. And then she started singing. Of course, her father wasn't home because she wouldn't dare sing in front of him. But Lata's mother, who was fondly called Mai, noticed how beautifully her 5-year-old girl sings. She told her husband, Deenanath, later in the day, that Lata sings beautifully. Deenanath called Lata and asked her to sing the same song in front of him. Lata sang cautiously and nervously. And as you'd have guessed, Deenanath saw the talent right away in his eldest child. He was so impressed with her prowess that he took it upon himself to teach her Hindustani classical music. Thus began Latadi's musical journey at 5 years of age. Her father became her first guru and would remain her guru for life even after he died. She would learn the ropes of Hindustani classical music sitting on her father's lap. He even started taking her along with him to his plays. Sometimes she would act, sometimes she would sing, and the audience always loved this little girl who was clearly so talented. Although Lata herself liked singing more than acting, she actually hated acting, but like I said, in Indian theatre, the lines are blurred. So she acted, but singing was where her heart truly was. Thus was born a dream in the young Lata Mangeshkar that one day she would become a Hindustani classical vocalist, just like her father. Fortunately for her, her own father was her singing guru. Life seemed perfect. But unfortunately, young Lata's dreams came crashing down very soon. Deenanath's theatre company fell into crisis. Remember, these were the 1930s. India was still under the British rule. Times were very turbulent. In such a time, theatre is not something that thrives. The family's finances began to dry up, and Deenanath, the sole breadwinner, like many artists of his time, fell victim to alcoholism. Lata saw her father, her hero, her guru just wither away. And very soon, unfortunately, Deenanath passed away in the year 1942 at the age of 41 due to his alcoholism. Lata was only 12 years old. This untimely death of her father would prove to be the most defining event of her entire life. This is when the young Lata began to become the Lata Mangeshkar that we know today. The young Lata was deep in grief, but she could not wallow in her grief for long. The family had run out of money, and now the principal breadwinner was dead. Lata was the eldest sibling. There were 4 more, Asha, Usha, Meena, and the young Hridaynath. Now, the family had no choice but to send Lata, the 12-year-old girl who just lost her father, her guru, out into the world to provide for the family. Because she was the only one who had some skill. She had learned some acting, some music from her father, so she could go out in the market to earn for the family. And so at 12 years of age, the responsibility of earning a living for her family fell on the shoulders of Lata Mangeshkar. Just imagine, at 12 years of age, you lose your father, your hero, your first guru, and before your tears have even dried, you have to go out in the world as the sole breadwinner. From this moment on, all Latadi cared about was her family, that they be okay, that they be provided for. She assumed the role of her father at 12 years of age. Thanks to her father's goodwill, there were plenty of people who wanted to help. One such person was the Marathi film director Master Vinayak. He took Lata under his wings and cast her as a child actress in his film Pahli Mangala Gaur. What you may not know is that the great Lata Mangeshkar did not start her film career as a singer, but as an actress. She acted in 8 films from 1942 to 1948, but as I said, she hated acting. She absolutely hated it. She didn't like the idea of putting on makeup and being in front of the camera for the world to see. And she knew that her father would have hated it as well. In fact, almost 70 years later, when she was asked if there's anything she regrets in her life, the 85-year-old Lata Mangeshkar said that she regrets being a child actor. She just didn't like it at all. But she did it because she didn't have a choice. She had to earn money or else her family would starve. Remember, this is a 12-year-old girl we are talking about. But then, Lata Mangeshkar's life changed when India got independent in 1947. You see, before that, while Lata was an actress, it wasn't like she had quit singing completely. In those days, like from the days of Natya Shastra, The actress and the singer would sometimes be the same, even in films. And even when the singer was different from the actress, the singer would not be credited for the song. So Lata Mangeshkar actually did record a few songs in the films that she acted in, but either the songs were cut out or she wasn't publicly credited. Now, while Lata Di did not like acting, she still loved singing. But her singing career would just not take off. The most popular singer in 1940s British India was a singer and actress named Noor Jahan. She was the one who ruled the hearts. She was the one who ruled the screens. But when India got independent, Noor Jahan moved to Pakistan, leaving behind a void in the Indian film industry for a female playback singer. And that void would be filled by none other than the now 18-year-old child actress, Lata Mangeshkar. In 1948, Lata Mangeshkar got the opportunity to sing a song in a movie called Mahal, a song that you would have probably heard called Aayega Aane Wala. I could have sung a bit for you, but believe me, you don't want to hear me sing. It will be a sin for me to sing in an episode about Lata Mangeshkar. So look it up. You've probably heard this song. I'm not going to sing it for you. So Lata Mangeshkar sings this song, but she isn't credited as a singer for the song. The character of the actress, this fictional character called Kamini, is credited. Not even the actress, but the character of the actress. It's truly bizarre. The actress was none other than the beautiful Madhubala herself, by the way. Anyway, the song comes out and becomes so popular that All India Radio receives hundreds of letters from people demanding the name of the actual singer. And so in 1949, India discovers the 19-year-old Lata Mangeshkar. From that point on, Lata Mangeshkar would never look back. She gives up her acting career and begins to focus solely on her playback singing career. Now, this wasn't a conscious choice either. Remember, she still wanted to be a Hindustani classical singer like her father. And film music wasn't something she was really interested in. In fact, her father and all Hindustani classical singers to this day actually do not really respect film music much. And she knew that if she pursued film music, her classical music practice would take a backseat. But she didn't have a choice. She needed to provide for her family. That's all she cared about. But the difference between Lata Di and her Hindustani classical peers was that Lata Di did not consider her new art form, playback singing, any lower than Hindustani classical music. She gave everything she had to this new art form. And those were the early days for film music in India, by the way. And very soon, Lata Mangeshkar would become the biggest name in Indian film music. So one can make the case that Indian playback singing was made in Lata Di's image. So whatever Lata Di did and how she treated film music would become the standard, would become the normal. And because of this attitude of hers, the perspective of Hindustani classical musicians began changing towards Indian film music. Ustad Alauddin Khan, when he listened to Lata Di's song Hai Kahin Par Shad Mani, he said, and I quote, "If such is the quality of film music, I have no objection," affectionately calling Lata Mangeshkar Asman Se Aayi Hui Pari. The great Ustad Bade Ghulam Ali Khan himself once said of Lata Mangeshkar, "Kambakt kabhi besuri nahi hoti." That damned girl never goes out of tune. Lata Di gave this new art form everything and submitted completely to it right from the very beginning. Such was her dedication. Let me give you a quick example. One day when she was very young, still in the early part of her career, she was recording a song for the film composer Anil Biswas for a film featuring the great Dilip Kumar. Dilip Kumar came to Anil Biswas and expressed doubts over the young Lata's singing, saying that how can a dal bhat eating Marathi girl do justice to the spice of Urdu lyrics? Like today, back in the day, many poets and lyricists wrote in Urdu. Now, unfortunately, Lata Di overheard Dilip Saab saying this. But instead of taking it as an insult, she saw the validity in Dilip Kumar's comment. It was true, her Urdu pronunciation wasn't that great. So she went home to her friend, asked him to introduce her to his Maulvi so she could learn Urdu pronunciation from a Maulvi himself. And she did so for over a year. And she became so good at it that Dilip Kumar, the great Dilip Kumar, had to eat his words, slurp them very much like dal bhat. In fact, Lata Di and Dilip Kumar, or Yusuf Bhai as Lata Di used to call him, shared a very close relationship for the rest of their lives. Yusuf Bhai considered Lata Di her younger sister and always looked out for her. Funnily, Lata Di tells a story that her pronunciation of Urdu words eventually was considered so sacrosanct that because she used to pronounce the word mohabbat as muhabbat, all singers for decades after her pronounced mohabbat as muhabbat, just because she used to pronounce it like so, even though it wasn't strictly the popular pronunciation. Such was her impact on Indian film music in those days. Through the 1950s and 1960s, Lata Di's career kept blossoming. She became the most celebrated playback singer of India. She worked with legendary music composers of the time, S.D. Burman, Naushad, Shankar Jaikishan, and many more. Thankfully, by this time, she had earned enough fame and money that her family was fine. In fact, they were thriving. Lata took all her siblings under her wing and encouraged them to learn music. Such would be her guidance and caretaking that years later, her primary competition in the industry would be her own sister, Asha Bhosle, who she herself raised and looked after. Imagine being such a good guardian that the very baby sister you raised becomes your primary rival years later. Apart from her family, Lata Di was fully consumed in her art, so much so that she barely had time for anything else. She says that in the 50s and 60s, she didn't take a single week off, never went on vacations, even during Diwali. And mind you, these were analog times. Unlike today, where recording music and songs is 100 times easier and faster with auto-tune and singers recording in piecemeal or even remotely with all sorts of technological support, back during Lata Di's time, you had to spend an entire day in the studio to record a song, do multiple takes till you got the song right. Lata Di sang over 35,000 songs with all those limitations for most of her career. It required nothing less than complete submission to the art form. And that's the sense you get when you read about her life or watch her interviews. And it's hard to describe it except to say it very simplistically that she's the purest soul that you will ever encounter. And I know that you may have heard things to the contrary, and we shall address that later in this episode, but having spent over a month actually researching about Lata Di's life, reading about her from multiple sources, watching her interviews, it seems to me that she was incapable of irony, that she was incapable of sarcasm. You know, the kind of person who you cannot imagine will say mean things or joke about anything. That's the sense I got. And everything about her just, adds to that persona. She would wear this simple white saris all her life and had that disarming smile that went deep into her eyes and her pure dedication to art as though there was nothing else that mattered in life. And interestingly, I got the same sense when I watched that Jiro documentary. That this guy, Jiro Ono, is such a pure soul. I think there's something about practicing your art with all your being that elevates you above silly and petty mind games. That's how Lata Di was. But it wasn't like she was a pushover. No. She stood for her principles and fought tooth and nail for the things and ideas that she believed were right, especially when it came to her art form of playback singing. Let me give you two quick examples, and these two examples are very important in the history of Indian film music. In the year 1954, the first Filmfare Awards were organized as pretty much a rip-off of the Oscars, the Academy Awards. So much so that the award itself was a copy of the Oscars, I think still is. In 1956, the music composer duo Shankar Jaikishan was awarded the Filmfare Award for Best Music Composer. And like it always happens, Filmfare wanted them to perform at the award ceremony. But they weren't singers, so they asked Lata Mangeshkar if she could perform one of their songs, Rasik Balma, which is a very difficult song to sing. My mother tells me she's also a singer. Now the interesting thing is, and really stupid in hindsight, is that Filmfare at the time did not have an award for playback singing. You know why? Because the Oscars don't have an award for playback singing. And they just blindly copied the Oscars. So anyway, the editor of the Filmfare magazine, a certain J.C. Jain, calls up Lata Mangeshkar and urges her to sing the song. But Lata Di refused, saying that, well, you guys don't even consider playback singing an important art form. Why should a playback singer perform at your function? J.C. Jain gave her the Oscars argument that look, even the Oscars don't have an award for playback singing. To which Lata Di said, of course they don't, because American films are a different medium. Indian films have a different history, a different format, a different sensibility. She asked him, can Indian films be imagined without its songs? So she refused to perform at the award ceremony. But her impassioned argument convinced Filmfare that they should indeed have a category for best playback singing. And so in 1958, thanks to Lata Mangeshkar, Filmfare introduced the award for best playback singer male and female, and Lata Di became the first female singer to win the award for the film Madhumati for the song Aaj Aare Pardesi. If she had not stood her ground, it would have taken a long time for playback singers to gain that respect that they have today. I mean, today playback singers are like rock stars. Arijit Singh sells out stadia, I don't know what the right form is, in India and abroad. It wasn't the case back in the day. Filmfare didn't even have an award for them, just imagine. And throughout her career, she used her position of power to add respect to the craft of playback singing. In the 1960s, she famously argued that playback singers be paid royalties for that song, and that royalties should not be pocketed exclusively by the record companies because the singers make the song popular. And this was especially important because so many singers died poor in their old age. It was a very fair ask. Some of the most renowned singers of the day, Manna Dey, Kishore Kumar, Mukesh and Talat Mahmood stood by her side. But on the other side were all powerful record companies, and for some reason, Mohammad Rafi and her own sister Asha Bhosle, God knows why. This was a huge controversy at the time, and also the reason why a lot of ill things started to be spoken about Lata Mangeshkar. But ultimately, Lata Di won the battle. Music companies began paying royalties to playback singers, and it set new standards for the remuneration of Indian playback singers, securing a more sustainable economic future for generations of playback singers that followed. But she didn't stop there. She not only used her power to empower her fellow musicians, but also the country as a whole. Here's a crazy story about Lata Di that you may not know. The fact that very few know about this tells us how private Lata Di was in her work. In 1983, when India won the Cricket World Cup, the BCCI did not have any money to reward the Indian cricket team. Can you imagine knowing what BCCI is today? I mean, imagine, such was the socialism of our country that the 1983 Cricket World Cup victory, the happiest the country had ever been since independence. I mean, India won the World Cup in a sport of its colonizers, before the colonizers, in the colonizers' backyard, and BCCI didn't have enough money to reward the men who did it. What a shame for India. When Lata Di came to know of this, she was like, no, something needs to be done. She used her name and power to fix the situation. She organized a charity concert in Delhi to raise money for the Indian cricket team. Of course, Lata Mangeshkar was such a celebrity that it worked. The concert raised 20 lakh rupees, which allowed every cricketer from the winning team to be awarded 1 lakh rupees each as a cash reward for bringing the World Cup home. 1 lakh was a huge amount in 1980s India. The Indian cricket team finally got their due thanks to Lata Didi. Kapil Dev to this day remembers this gesture from Lata Didi. She was a patriot through and through, always caring for the country and in her own ways contributing to its progress whenever she could, however she could. In the 1990s, when India liberalized and the hope and dynamism of New India was captured in films like Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, Lata Di was still there, almost 70 years old, but still singing songs for actresses who were her granddaughter's age. I mean, if you listen to Tujhe Dekha To Ye Jana Sanam from DDLJ, it feels like it's sung by a 20-year-old girl. I mean, imagine the first actress she sang for was Madhubala, and in the 1990s, she's still lending her voice to actresses like Kajol, Rani Mukherjee, and then in 2000s to Preeti Zinta and Kareena Kapoor. It's incredible. She was able to keep her voice young because she practiced every day. She practiced and did her riyaz of Hindustani classical music every day, like it was life itself. India went from British India to independent India to socialist India to liberalized India, but Lata Di remained as the voice of the nation, singing in more than 20 languages across the length and breadth of the country. A.R. Rahman once described the experience of recording a song with Lata Mangeshkar in 2005. In 2005, when she sang Luka Chipi, she was 76 years old. Rahman says that she could not stand because of her health, so she sat in a chair and meticulously practiced the song again and again, getting the pronunciations right, the mood right, the tones right, as though it was the first song she was ever going to sing. And mind you, this was the last film song that she ever recorded. She once said that when she sang a song, she became the character. Sometimes she became a lover, sometimes she became a friend, and sometimes she became a mother, like in the case of Luka Chipi. It's ironic that Latadi, who sang so many love songs all her life, never had a romantic partner. Well, it wasn't by choice. She did fall in love once, but as they say, fate loves irony. In the late 1960s, she met a certain Raj Singh Dungarpur, who was a first-class cricket player who used to play Ranji Trophy for Rajasthan. Raj Singh Dungarpur also happened to be royalty, a literal royalty belonging to the royal family of Dungarpur. His family used to rule over the erstwhile kingdom of Rajputana. Lata Di and Raj Singh soon fell in love over their mutual interest in cricket and music. But their love story did not meet a happy end. Raj Singh Dungarpur's family opposed their relationship because, well, Lata wasn't royalty. They tried, argued, but the family did not budge. Such was their love for each other that they refused to marry anyone else for the rest of their lives and decided to remain close friends till Dungarpur's untimely death in the year 2009 due to Alzheimer's. Lata Mangeshkar was at his side when he died. She has been very private about this relationship, saying that it's not proper to talk about it as some things are meant only for the heart to know, so we won't take this further. But as an interesting aside, Raj Singh Dungarpur's legacy and his big claim to fame came from a very different area of culture. In the year 1989, when he was the chairperson of the selection committee of the BCCI, he fought against everyone on the committee to allow a certain 16-year-old kid to play for the Indian national cricket team. A certain someone known as Sachin Tendulkar. Yes, it was Raj Singh Dungarpur who introduced Sachin to the world. Incidentally, Latadi and Sachin too shared a very deep bond with each other. Tendulkar used to call her Ai, which in Marathi means mother. In that interview with Javed Akhtar, the interview we started this episode with, when Latadi was asked what would she want to be reborn as, and she said she wishes not to be reborn because she wants to attain moksha through her art, she didn't stop there. She added something more to her answer. She said that even if she were to be reborn in human life, she doesn't wish to be reborn as Lata Mangeshkar. She said that everyone knows Lata Mangeshkar's successes, but only I know my sacrifices and struggles. Imagine a life that began at 12, where she had to provide for her family, fill the void that her father, her guru, her hero left unexpectedly, and then sacrifice your own dream of wanting to become a Hindustani classical vocalist, compromising on it, but still submitting to this new art form like it's her own, creating it, molding it, championing it, and going out of your way to help not only your peers, but also the nation at large, and then being told that you are not allowed to marry the person you love, and then remain unmarried for the rest of your life. It's not an easy life, and out of all of this, what we, India and Indians got was a body of work that shall remain unparalleled for years and decades to come, if not forever, and an art form that gives us so much joy to this day. Which is why this next part really pisses me off. I don't know if it is true for you, but I grew up in a Maharashtrian family which loves music. My mother is actually a singer herself and spends hours every day training and singing, and sometimes even performs publicly. Of course, we as a family revere Lata Mangeshkar. We consider her to be the zenith of musical artistry. But there's another thing that I grew up hearing about Lata Mangeshkar from people around me, and they had heard it from people around them. It was more in the territory of gossip than anything else. That she did not let anyone else succeed. That she ensured that other female singers could never replace her. That she sometimes selfishly blocked other people's careers. I'm pretty sure that you have heard something on similar lines as well. Now, having researched a great deal on Lata Mangeshkar's life, I can tell you with near certainty that all of it is false and pure gossip. What people fail to see is that there was no one like Lata Mangeshkar, that she was in a league of her own. Many upcoming singers who were trying to make a name in the industry copied her style, and then obviously, if a music composer has a choice, why would they not choose the original over someone who's trying to copy them? Such was Latadi's dominance, such was her excellence. It wasn't she who was trying to block other people's careers, it was market. She was such a big deal, she was so good that people only wanted to listen to Lata Mangeshkar, so much so that her career spanned for about 60 years. How could that have been possible if the market didn't allow for it? Once S.D. Burman was asked why did he not give chance to other female singers and insisted that only Lata Mangeshkar sing his songs. He said, Lata is Lata. He was Bengali. My unfortunate conclusion is that the only thing that explains this rumor mill about Lata Mangeshkar is, unfortunately, plain and simple sexism. Now imagine if Lata Mangeshkar were a man. Imagine that if it was a man who was leaps and bounds ahead of his competition. He'd be revered, he'd be respected, even his ruthlessness would be seen as something that is justified. But because this incredible excellence and dedication to the craft lived inside a simple, unassuming, quiet woman, there must be something ulterior behind it, that she must have played some sort of mind games to further her career, that she must have backstabbed people to get ahead. In fact, let me go a step further, and I know I shouldn't be saying this because, as you might have gathered by now, I am a man. But let me put my neck out and say that I believe Lata Mangeshkar is a feminist icon. She doesn't fit the aesthetic mold of what a feminist icon is, but just look at her life. She single-handedly provided for her family, did not take shit from a male-dominated industry. All the music composers, all the record companies were dominated by men. Fought for her rights, did not compromise on her dignity when she was told that she cannot marry the person she loves, stayed single all her life without ever depending on a man, and still lived a meaningful life full of social and cultural impact. And I'm not the only one saying this. The great filmmaker Basu Chatterjee said the same thing back in the 1980s. He said that the story of Latadi's life reads like a powerful feminist script. What pains my heart is that in the research for this episode, I really struggled to find material on her life. Part of it is because, she lived a very private life, but part of it, unfortunately, is because there isn't enough interest in her life in today's times. Because she wasn't exciting and spicy enough. In many ways, her sister Asha had that interesting life. That's why my friends were a little perplexed when I told them I'm going to do an episode on Latadi, because they were like, is there anything interesting about her life? And I was like, guys, you have no idea. She could well have been the first episode of this podcast series. Doing this episode has been very hard because there were things going on in my personal life that made it very hard for me to focus and to continue working. But throughout this episode, I kept reminding myself that Lata Mangeshkar, having experienced so much pain in her life, from the age of 12 all the way till she became an adult, somehow created over 35,000 songs in her lifetime. To put in perspective how impressive that number is, she lived for a total of about 34,000 days. She's a great artist because her art was her life. And our country, our culture, our world is so much richer because of her. There is so much to learn here for all of us, even if we are not artists, even if we go about our days doing what we do. I think a certain amount of dedication, and in this case, complete dedication to that, can help us live a very purposeful and meaningful life. She died on 6th February 2022 at the age of 92 due to complications owing to COVID. A state funeral was declared, followed by 2 days of national mourning. The national flag flew at half-mast, mourning the death of one of India's greatest. People from all walks of life attended her funeral, from the top filmmakers, from the top film stars, cricketers, industrialists, politicians, including the Prime Minister. She may be no more, but her songs live on forever. On our streets, in our weddings, in our festivals, and in our homes. I hope that she achieved what she wanted the most: moksha and attainment of the highest level of consciousness through her art, through her music, through her singing. That's all on this episode of All Risk is Creative. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to All Risk is Creative. This podcast is owned and produced by Cosm Entertainment Private Limited. Original music composed by Mehul Fadnavis. Sound mixing and mastering by Ankit Thakur. And I'm your host, Palash Kulkarni. You can find me on X at @BiggerSplash. That's ABIGGERSPALASH. If you have any feedback on the podcast, you can DM me on X or write to me at palash@cosm.in. That's COZM.in.